The wind carried ice crystals that bit into exposed skin like tiny needles. A fresh layer of snow had fallen overnight, pristine and untouched across most of Pine Ridge, except for the clearing before the Peterson estate. There, a small figure labored in the bitter cold, her red mittens worn through at the fingertips, her breath forming small clouds that dissipated into the winter air. Sophie Carter swept the walkway with methodical strokes, her 5-year-old frame hunched against the biting wind. The broom was too large for her small hands, forcing her to grip it awkwardly as she cleared the path to the ornate front gate. Her cheeks were cherry red, not just from the cold, but from dried tears that had frozen against her skin. From the porch, Vanessa Peterson watched with arms crossed over her expensive wool coat, her voice sharp as the icicles hanging from the eaves. "Make sure you get all of it, especially by the gate. Mr. Brooks is coming for dinner tonight." The little girl nodded without looking up, her movements becoming more urgent. Behind Vanessa, Greg Peterson lounged in a wicker chair, seemingly unbothered by the cold as he dragged on a cigarette. His eyes followed his wife with detached amusement, then drifted to the child with something colder than indifference. "She missed a spot by the fence post," he remarked casually, flicking ash onto the pristine snow of the porch. Vanessa's mouth tightened. "Sophie, did you hear me? Do it properly or you can forget about dinner tonight too." Sophie's small shoulders tensed, but she didn't respond, only worked faster, her worn boots slipping slightly on patches of ice. A strand of dark hair had escaped her knitted cap, sticking to her wet cheek. The distant rumble of an engine broke the winter silence. Through the falling snow, headlights appeared on the country road leading to the Peterson estate. Sophie paused her gaze, lifting to watch as a black SUV slowed near the property. The vehicle came to a stop just outside the freshly swept gate. For a moment, it idled there, exhaust creating ghosts in the cold air. Then the driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out into the snow. Michael Westbrook stood motionless beside his vehicle, his cashmere overcoat collecting snowflakes that melted against the dark fabric. At 52, his face carried the weathered lines of a man who had seen too much, yet his posture remained military straight, a remnant of his former life. His eyes gray as the winter sky locked onto the small figure by the gate. Sophie had stopped sweeping entirely now, the broom forgotten in her hands as she stared back. Something passed between them in that moment of silent recognition, a connection that transcended words. Snowflakes landed on Sophie's eyelashes, clinging there like tiny stars against her wide brown eyes. Greg straightened in his chair. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered, grinding out his cigarette. Vanessa moved swiftly down the porch steps, her high-heeled boots leaving sharp imprints in the snow. She grabbed Sophie's arm, pulling her roughly behind her as she approached the gate. "Can I help you?" Her voice carried the artificial warmth of practiced hospitality, but her grip on Sophie's shoulder tightened. Michael's gaze lingered on the child for another moment before shifting to Vanessa. "I'm looking for the Carter residence, James Carter's home." At the mention of the name, Sophie's head jerked up, her eyes suddenly alive with recognition. Vanessa's smile remained fixed, though it had cooled considerably. "I believe you have the wrong address. No one by that name lives here anymore." "My father was James Carter." The small voice came from behind Vanessa, startling both adults. Sophie had spoken with unexpected clarity, her chin lifted slightly despite her stepmother's tightening grip. Michael's expression softened as he looked at the child, but before he could respond, Vanessa yanked Sophie backward. "Quiet," she hissed, then turned back to Michael with a manufactured smile. "I'm sorry for the confusion. My husband purchased this property over a year ago. Perhaps you are thinking of another house in the area." Greg had descended from the porch, now his tall frame blocking the path to the house. He sized up Michael with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to measuring threats. "You a friend of the previous owner?" His tone suggested the question was merely a formality. He had already decided Michael needed to leave. "Yes, James and I served together." Michael's eyes continued to drift towards Sophie, who was now half hidden behind Vanessa's coat. "I've been overseas. I only recently heard about his passing." Greg's mouth twisted into what might have been a sympathetic expression, but never reached his eyes. "War's a terrible thing. But life goes on, houses change hands. If you're looking to pay respects, the cemetery's 5 miles down the main road." He jerked his thumb in the general direction. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we were in the middle of something." Michael remained where he stood, his gaze now fixed on Sophie's small hand where it clutched Vanessa's coat. The mitten had slipped, revealing an angry red mark encircling the child's wrist. And the little girl, she's James's daughter. Greg stepped forward, positioning himself more directly between Michael and the others. That's really none of your business, is it? His voice remained casual but carried an unmistakable warning. Look, I appreciate you served with the guy, but showing up unannounced at our home isn't appropriate. We've got dinner preparations underway. Michael held his ground for a long moment. Snow continued to fall around them, the silence broken only by the soft whisper of flakes settling on the ground. Finally, he reached into his coat pocket and extracted a business card, offering it through the gate. Michael Westbrook, if there's anything Sophie needs, please call me. I'm staying at the Pine Ridge Inn. Greg took the card without looking at it, tucking it into his pocket with a tight smile. Sure thing. Now if you'll excuse us. He turned to placing his hand on Vanessa's lower back and guiding her and Sophie toward the house. Michael watched them retreat, his eyes never leaving the small figure in the worn red coat until the front door closed firmly behind them. Inside his SUV, Michael sat with the engine running, heat blasting through the vents, though he barely felt it. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. In the distance, the Peterson house stood against the gray winter sky, smoke curling from the chimney in deceptively homey spirals. His mind replayed the image of Sophie's face, of the mark on her wrist, of the way her eyes had lit with recognition at her father's name. With deliberate control, he put the vehicle in drive and pulled away from the gate. But his decision had already been made. He had ignored his promise once. He would not do so again. Snow was falling harder as Michael guided his SUV through the wrought iron gates of Pine Ridge Cemetery. The groundskeeper had apparently abandoned his post early, leaving fresh snow to blanket the pathways between the graves. Michael's boots crunched through the accumulating powder as he made his way deeper into the cemetery past rows of headstones, nearly obscured by winter's white shroud. He found James's grave in the veterans section, a simple granite marker partially covered in snow. Michael knelt beside it, brushing away the powder with his gloved hand to reveal the inscription, James Daniel Carter, Captain, United States Army, beloved father and hero, 1972-2019. Hello, old friend, Michael said softly, his words forming vapor in the frigid air. For a long moment he remained silent, the only sound the soft patter of snowflakes landing on his shoulders. Then he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a silver medal, turning it over in his palm. The metal caught what little light penetrated the overcast sky, gleaming dully against the black leather of his glove. The cemetery around him faded as memory took him back to the dusty heat of another place, another time. Their unit had been pinned down for hours, artillery fire raining destruction around their position. Michael had been hit, blood soaking through his uniform consciousness, fading in and out as the battle raged. Then James was there, dragging him through dirt and debris to shelter, applying pressure to the wound, even as bullets kicked up dust inches from where they lay. Stay with me, Mike, James had ordered, his face streaked with grime and sweat. You're not checking out on my watch. Later in the medical tent, James had sat beside Michael's cot, his expression grave. I need to ask something of you, he'd said, his voice low. Something important. Michael had nodded, still groggy from morphine and blood loss. If anything happens to me over here, I need you to look in on my family. My wife Lisa, our daughter Sophie. They're everything to me. Nothing's going to happen to you, Michael had protested, but James had silenced him with a look. Promise me, Mike. Promise me you'll make sure they're okay. Michael had promised, and when they'd both made it home, when life had resumed its normal rhythms, the promise had seemed unnecessary. Then came the news of James's death during a subsequent deployment, and Michael had sent flowers, had attended the funeral, had offered generic condolences to the widow who stood shell-shocked beside the grave. But he hadn't stayed, hadn't checked in, hadn't fulfilled his promise. Because looking at James's family reminded him of everything he himself had lost to war, the ability to connect, to feel, to build something lasting. Now, as he knelt in the snow beside his friend's grave, the weight of that failure pressed on him like a physical thing. He'd thrown himself into building his security consulting firm, amassing wealth and influence while allowing the truly important things to slip through his fingers. As he brushed more snow from the headstone, his hand encountered something unexpected. Partially buried beneath the white powder lay a small bouquet of winter flowers, carefully wrapped in protective plastic against the cold. Attached to them, a ribbon with childish handwriting, I love you, Daddy. Michael stared at the flowers, his throat suddenly tight. The image of Sophie's small face in the bitter cold flashed before him. She had been here making this trek alone through snow and freezing temperatures to honor her father. Something caught his eye near the edge of the bouquet, a small footprint in the snow, a child's boot print, not yet completely filled in by fresh snow. It couldn't have been more than a day old. The thought of Sophie walking these paths alone carrying her small tribute made his chest ache. "I'm sorry, James," he whispered to the silent stone. "I failed you, but I'm here now. I'll make it right." As he stood, he slipped the silver medal back into his pocket, its weight a reminder of promises made and broken, and perhaps, if he were worthy, capable of being redeemed. The Johnson household stood in stark contrast to the Peterson estate. The modest two-story home had weathered many Pine Ridge winters, its wooden siding painted a cheerful yellow that seemed to defy the gray winter day. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, and warm light glowed behind curtained windows. Michael knocked stamping snow from his boots while he waited. The door opened to reveal Elizabeth Johnson, a woman in her early 60s with silver threaded through her dark hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she recognized her visitor. "Michael Westbrook," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "My goodness, it's been years." "Hello, Elizabeth," Michael replied, the formality in his tone softened by genuine respect. "I hope I'm not intruding." She shook her head, already stepping back to allow him entry. "Not at all. Come in before you freeze to that doorstep." The interior of the Johnson home was as warm as its exterior promised, the living room dominated by a wood stove radiating blessed heat. Family photos lined the mantel, and a half-finished knitting project occupied one end of the well-worn sofa. Elizabeth gestured for Michael to take a seat while she busied herself in the adjoining kitchen. "I just put on a fresh pot of coffee," she called over her shoulder. "You look like you could use some." Michael lowered himself into an armchair near the stove, allowing the heat to work into his chilled bones. "I appreciate it." Elizabeth returned moments later with two steaming mugs, handing one to Michael before settling onto the sofa across from him. For a moment they sipped in companionable silence, but Michael could sense her studying him over the rim of her cup. "You didn't come back just to sample my coffee," she said finally, "though it is the best in Pine Ridge if I do say so myself." Michael cradled the warm mug between his palms. "I saw Sophie today, at the Peterson place." Elizabeth's expression darkened. She set her mug down with a decisive click against the coffee table. "So you know?" "I know she's living with her stepmother and a man who isn't her father. I know she was outside sweeping snow while he sat watching. I know there was a mark on her wrist that no 5-year-old should have." His voice remained calm, but tension underlined each word. "What I don't know is how this happened or where her mother is." Elizabeth sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Lisa James's wife passed away 6 months after he did. Cancer. It was quick and brutal. Vanessa was James's second wife. They married about a year after Lisa's death. Then she met Greg Peterson, and well." She spread her hands in a gesture that encompassed all the words left unspoken. "And Sophie?" Michael prompted. "After Vanessa remarried, things changed. The new husband didn't want another man's child, but he certainly wanted the property that came with her. James had left everything in Sophie's name with Vanessa as trustee until Sophie comes of age." Elizabeth's mouth tightened. "That child went from being cherished to being barely tolerated overnight. Has anyone reported this to authorities?" Elizabeth's laugh held no humor. "In Pine Ridge, Greg works for Maxwell Brooks, who owns half the businesses in town, including the lumber mill that employs most of the population. Brooks has the mayor and the police chief in his pocket. A few of us have tried to help Sophie where we can, but—" She trailed off, her eyes drifting to the window where snow continued to fall. "In Pine Ridge, people who stand up against Maxwell Brooks tend to disappear like snow in springtime." The front door opened then, bringing with it a gust of cold air and a young man stomping snow from his boots. Kevin Johnson was the image of his mother in male form, though his face lacked the lines experience had etched into hers. "Mom, the Wilsons' truck is stuck again. I told them I'd bring over the O." He stopped short upon seeing Michael's surprise evident in his expression. "Sorry, didn't know we had company." Elizabeth made introductions, explaining Michael's connection to James and Sophie. Kevin's friendly demeanor cooled noticeably at the mention of the Petersons. "So you've seen how they treat her," he said, his young face hardening. "That little girl deserves better." "Kevin," his mother cautioned, but he shook his head. "No, Mom. If Mr. Westbrook is actually going to do something, he should know what he's up against." He turned to Michael. Sophie's not just neglected, she's being deliberately isolated. No school, she's supposedly homeschooled, but I've never seen any evidence of that. No friends allowed to visit. The only time she leaves that house is when Vanessa takes her to town for appearance's sake, always dressed perfectly, always with that rehearsed smile. Michael absorbed this information, his expression revealing nothing, though his grip on the coffee mug tightened fractionally. Do you know if they have plans for her? Kevin and Elizabeth exchanged a glance that sent a chill through Michael, unrelated to the winter day. They're sending her away, Elizabeth said finally, to a special boarding school up north. The bus comes in 3 days before the big storm hits. What kind of school takes 5-year-olds in the middle of winter? Michael asked. Kevin's expression darkened further. The kind that isn't really a school. There have been rumors about Brooks and his associates for years, children from troubled homes disappearing into these special programs. Some come back years later completely changed. Others never return at all. Kevin, Elizabeth said again more sharply, we don't know that for certain. We know enough, Mom. Kevin's voice held the passionate certainty of youth. And we've done nothing because we're all too scared of losing our jobs or worse. Michael set his mug down, his decision crystallizing into absolute clarity. I need everything you know about the Petersons, about Brooks, about this school, and I need it now. Elizabeth studied him for a long moment, seemingly weighing something in her mind. Finally, she nodded. I'll tell you what I know, but Michael, this isn't just about keeping a promise to an old friend anymore. Once you step into this, there's no walking away, not safely. Michael thought of Sophie's eyes, of the small bouquet on James's grave, of the mark on her delicate wrist. I understand. The Pine Ridge Community Church stood on the edge of town, its white steeple rising toward a sky heavy with impending snow. Inside the sanctuary was mercifully warm with light filtering through stained glass windows to cast colorful patterns across worn wooden pews. Pastor William Mason sat across from Michael in his modest office, his weathered face thoughtful as he absorbed what Michael had shared. Despite being in his 60s, the pastor conveyed a strength that went beyond the physical, his large hands folded calmly on the desk between them. James Carter was a good man, Pastor William said finally. His death was a loss to this entire community, though few will speak of it now. Elizabeth Johnson mentioned that speaking out in Pine Ridge can be dangerous, Michael said carefully, watching the pastor's reaction. William's smile held sadness rather than humor. Elizabeth always did have a gift for understatement. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking softly beneath his weight. Pine Ridge wasn't always like this. When I first came here 30 years ago, it was a true community. People looked out for one another. Then the economy changed, the old industries died, and Maxwell Brooks arrived with his money and promises. And now he owns the town. He owns more than buildings and businesses, Mr. Westbrook. He owns people's livelihoods, their security, their futures. The pastor's gaze drifted to the window where snow continued to accumulate on the sill. Fear is a powerful master, yet you speak out against him. Pastor William's eyes returned to Michael's face, a faint smile touching his lips. I answer to a higher authority. Besides, what can they do to me? I'm an old man with no family to threaten, no possessions worth taking. They could burn this church to the ground, Michael pointed out. The pastor's smile widened slightly. They could, but even Brooks recognizes the value of keeping up appearances. A town without a church raises questions he'd rather avoid. His expression sobered. Now tell me what you intend to do about young Sophie. Michael spread his hands. I'm still figuring that out. I need to understand what I'm up against, what legal options exist. Legal options, William repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought of that approach. Mr. Westbrook Maxwell Brooks writes the laws in Pine Ridge. His partner Richard Peterson is married to Sophie's legal guardian. The local judge plays poker with Brooks every Thursday night. There must be some way to appeal to authorities beyond Pine Ridge, Michael insisted. Perhaps. The pastor leaned forward, his voice lowering, though they were alone in the church. But you should know that Brooks and Peterson aren't just business partners. They're involved in land acquisition through methods that wouldn't bear legal scrutiny. James Carter's property was particularly valuable to them due to its location adjacent to timberland Brooks has been trying to access for years. Michael's brow furrowed. Are you suggesting James's death wasn't an accident? Pastor William held up a cautioning hand. I'm suggesting nothing of the sort. James died serving his country. What I am saying is that the transfer of his property to Peterson happened with suspicious convenience and speed. Land records would show the transfer, Michael said, mind already racing ahead. If there were irregularities, if you're thinking of investigating official records, I would advise extreme caution. Brooks has eyes everywhere in this town. The pastor stood moving to a bookshelf where he selected an old Bible. Opening it, he removed a small key hidden within the pages. Sometimes God calls us to protect the innocent through means that may seem questionable to those who've never faced true evil. He handed the key to Michael. The back door to the town hall. The night janitor is my nephew. He'll be taking a break between 9 and 9:30 tonight. Michael pocketed the keys, studying the pastor with newfound respect. I thought men of God were supposed to uphold the law. Pastor William's eyes held a steely determination that belied his gentle demeanor. Sometimes God needs people willing to get their hands dirty to protect the weak, just as snow still covers mud without being tainted by it. He placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. You're doing the right thing, son. But watch your back. In Pine Ridge, shadows have eyes. The town hall stood silent in the winter night, its windows dark except for the faint glow of security lights. Snow had tapered to occasional flakes that drifted lazily through pools of streetlight. Michael approached from the rear, keeping to the shadows, his footsteps nearly silent on the fresh powder. The key turned smoothly in the lock, just as Pastor William had promised. Inside the building was quiet, save for the distant hum of the heating system. Michael navigated the darkened corridors by memory, having studied the building's layout earlier that day during a casual visit to inquire about business permits. The records room was locked but yielded to the small set of picks Michael had brought. Years of military and security work had left him with skills that served him well in situations precisely like this one. Inside, he worked quickly and methodically, locating the property records for James Carter's land. The transfer documents appeared legitimate at first glance, official seals, notarized signatures, all the proper forms. But as Michael examined them more closely under his small penlight, inconsistencies emerged. The signature, purporting to be James Carter's, was wrong. Michael had seen his friend's handwriting countless times. James had been left-handed, and his signature had a distinctive leftward slant. The signature on these documents showed the rightward slope characteristic of right-handed writers. More damning still, the transfer was dated 3 weeks after James's death. Michael photographed the documents with his phone, careful to capture every page, every signature. As he was returning the file to its proper place, he heard a sound that made him freeze, footsteps in the hallway outside. He doused his light immediately, sliding silently behind a tall filing cabinet. The door to the records room opened, and a beam of light swept across the space. "Security check," called a voice. "Anyone in here?" Michael remained motionless, barely breathing. After what seemed an eternity, the door closed again, plunging the room back into darkness. He counted to 100 before emerging from his hiding place and making his way to the exit. The night air hit him with bracing coldness as he slipped out the back door, locking it behind him. Snow had begun falling more heavily again, quickly covering his tracks as he made his way toward the street where he'd parked several blocks away. He was halfway to his vehicle when instinct more than sound alerted him. He started to turn, just as something hard connected with the back of his head, sending him staggering forward into a snowbank. Before he could regain his footing, multiple sets of hands grabbed him, dragging him into the space between two buildings. "Mr. Westbrook," a voice said conversationally as a fist drove into his midsection. "Exploring our little town after hours." Michael fought back, landing several solid blows before something cold and metallic pressed against his temple. "That's enough of that," the voice continued. Michael could make out 3 figures in the darkness, their faces obscured by ski masks. "We just want to have a friendly chat about minding your own business." The beating that followed was professional and methodical, designed to cause pain without leaving obvious marks. When they finally set it back, Michael lay on his side in the snow, blood from his split lip staining the pristine white. One of the men knelt beside him, going through his pockets with practiced efficiency. He extracted Michael's phone, examining it briefly before pocketing it. "Mr. Brooks sends his regards," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. "Consider this your one warning. Pine Ridge doesn't welcome outsiders asking questions about local business. The next conversation won't be so pleasant." They left him there in the narrow alley snow, gradually accumulating on his prone form. For several minutes, Michael remained motionless, taking inventory of his injuries. Nothing broken, though his ribs screamed in protest as he finally pushed himself to a sitting position. The snow around him was stained pink, where blood from his face had dripped. His phone was gone along with the evidence he'd collected. Worse, they would now be alert to his investigation. With effort, Michael pulled himself upright, using the wall for support. Pain lanced through his body with every movement, but he forced himself to start walking. Each step was an exercise in determination, his boots leaving uneven tracks in the fresh snow. He had nearly reached his vehicle when darkness threatened to overwhelm him, his vision tunneling as he stumbled. A figure emerged from the swirling snow, catching him before he could fall. "Mr. Westbrook," Kevin Johnson's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Jesus, what happened to you?" Michael tried to respond, but the words wouldn't form properly. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was Kevin's concerned face haloed by falling snow, and beyond that, the distant glow of streetlights reflected in the winter sky. When Michael opened his eyes, he was lying on the Johnsons' couch, a fire crackling in the wood stove nearby. The clock on the mantel read just past midnight. His body felt like one massive bruise, but someone had cleaned the blood from his face and wrapped his ribs with a supportive bandage. Elizabeth Johnson appeared in his field of vision, her expression a mixture of concern and resignation. "Kevin found you half frozen in the snow. You're lucky he decided to take the late shift at the diner tonight." Michael attempted to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his midsection. "I need to go. It's not safe for you if I stay." "Lie still," Elizabeth ordered, placing a gentle but firm hand on his shoulder. No one followed Kevin, he made sure of it. Kevin entered from the kitchen, carrying a steaming mug. "Brooks's thugs?" he asked, handing the hot drink to Michael. Michael nodded, taking the mug gratefully. The herbal tea burned down his throat, bringing welcome warmth. "They took my phone, the evidence I found." "What evidence?" Elizabeth asked. Michael explained about the forged signature, the impossible date on the transfer documents. Kevin and Elizabeth exchanged glances. "That's enough to challenge the property transfer," Kevin said, "if we could get it to the right authorities." "We'd never make it out of Pine Ridge," Elizabeth countered. "Not with that kind of evidence. Brooks would make sure of it." Michael sipped the tea, his mind working, despite the throbbing pain in his skull. "I made a promise to James. I intend to keep it." "Even after this," Elizabeth gestured to his injuries. "Especially after this." Michael's voice hardened. "They've shown their hand now. They're afraid of what I might discover." "And what exactly do you plan to do?" Kevin asked. "You can't fight the entire town." Michael set the mug down, his decision crystallizing with perfect clarity. "I'm going to get Sophie out of there, tonight." Elizabeth gasped. "That's kidnapping." "It's rescue," Michael corrected, "and it's only temporary. Just until I can secure proper legal help outside Brooks's influence." "You'll never make it past their security," Kevin warned. "I don't have to," Michael replied grimly. "Tomorrow is Saturday. Vanessa takes Sophie to town every Saturday morning to maintain appearances, according to what you told me. I'll intercept them there." "And then what?" Elizabeth demanded. "Where will you go? The storm is coming. Roads will be closed." "I have a cabin," Michael said, "in the mountains about 50 miles north. Fully stocked off-grid, nearly impossible to find if you don't know exactly where to look." Kevin and Elizabeth looked at each other again, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Kevin spoke. "I'll help you." "Kevin, no," his mother protested. "Mom, we've looked the other way too long." Kevin's young face was set with determination. "That little girl deserves better than what's happening to her. Mr. Westbrook can't do this alone, not injured like he is." Elizabeth closed her eyes briefly, her shoulders slumping in resignation. When she opened them again, resolve had replaced the fear. "You'll need supplies, and a vehicle they won't recognize." The following morning dawned clear and bitter cold. Michael sat in Kevin's old pickup truck in the town square, his bruised body protesting every movement. They had positioned themselves with a clear view of the boutique where Vanessa always took Sophie for her weekly girl time, a carefully orchestrated public appearance to maintain the illusion of family harmony. Kevin had gone ahead to scout his young face, less likely to draw attention than Michael's now notorious presence. Right on schedule, a glossy black SUV pulled into a parking space near the boutique. Vanessa emerged first, immaculately dressed in a designer winter coat and boots. She opened the rear door and Sophie stepped out, looking like a perfect China doll in her red coat and matching hat. Michael watched as Vanessa gripped Sophie's hand tightly, perhaps too tightly, guiding her toward the shop entrance. Something in the woman's manner seemed off today, her movements more abrupt than usual, her posture tense. Kevin's voice crackled through the walkie-talkie they'd borrowed from Elizabeth's emergency kit. Something's wrong. Peterson just pulled up at the diner across the street. He never comes to these shopping trips. Michael scanned the area and spotted Greg Peterson entering the small diner, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. This deviation from routine set alarm bells ringing. Had they somehow been tipped off, the walkie-talkie crackled again. Brooks's security guy just went into the boutique through the back. Marcus something. Michael's decision was immediate. Change of plans. I'm going in now. Wait, Kevin protested. We said we'd wait until they were leaving. But Michael was already out of the truck, moving as quickly as his injuries would allow toward the boutique. Through the display window, he could see Vanessa speaking with a sales associate while Sophie stood quietly beside a rack of children's clothes, her small face expressionless. Inside the boutique was warm and smelled of cinnamon, piped-in music playing softly in the background. Sophie was the first to notice him, her eyes widening in recognition. Vanessa turned a moment later, her practiced smile faltering when she saw who had entered. Mr. Westbrook, what an unexpected surprise. Before Michael could respond, a commotion erupted from the back of the store. A woman's voice raised an accusation, and then Vanessa was striding towards Sophie, her face contorted with fury. How dare you, she hissed, seizing Sophie's arm. After everything we've done for you. Sophie looked bewildered, fear replacing the momentary recognition in her eyes. What did I do? The sales associate approached, holding an expensive bracelet. It was in her coat pocket, Mrs. Peterson. I'm so sorry. You little thief, Vanessa snarled, giving Sophie's arm a vicious shake. Just like your father, worthless. Something snapped in Michael at those words. He moved forward, his voice cutting through the tension like steel through ice. Let her go, now. Vanessa looked up, seemingly startled by his tone. Her grip on Sophie loosened slightly. This doesn't concern you. My stepdaughter has been stealing. No, I didn't, Sophie protested, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't take anything. Michael knelt before Sophie, ignoring the pain from his ribs, bringing himself to her eye level. I believe you, he said softly. Vanessa made a sound of outrage. How dare you undermine my authority with my child? She needs to learn. She needs to be protected, Michael interrupted, rising to his full height. From you, from Peterson, from whatever game you're playing. Outside, Greg Peterson was crossing the street from the diner, his pace quickening when he spotted Michael through the window. Behind Vanessa, a large man Michael presumed to be Marcus had appeared from the rear of the store. You need to leave, Vanessa said, her voice low and threatening. This is family business. Sophie became my business the moment her father asked me to protect her, Michael replied evenly. He turned to Sophie. Your dad and I were friends, good friends. He asked me to look out for you. Sophie's eyes widened. You knew my daddy? I did. He was the bravest man I ever met. Michael extended his hand to her, and I made him a promise. Don't you dare touch her, Vanessa hissed. The boutique door opened, admitting Greg Peterson in a blast of cold air. His face darkened when he saw Michael. You again, he said flatly. Didn't get the message last night. Michael's eyes never left Sophie's face. Some promises are more important than anything else, even life itself. Sophie looked from Michael to her stepmother, then to Greg, uncertainty written across her small features. Then, with a decisiveness that belied her years, she reached out and placed her hand in Michael's. Greg surged forward, but Michael was already moving, lifting Sophie into his arms and backing toward the door. Marcus blocked their path, his hand reaching inside his jacket. You're making a big mistake, Greg warned. Brooks will bury you for this. This child is James Carter's daughter, Michael said, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent boutique. And someone forged his signature on property transfer documents dated 3 weeks after his death. I'd say the mistake is yours. Greg's face paled slightly. He glanced at Vanessa, whose expression had become calculating. Put her down, Westbrook. Let's discuss this like reasonable people. There's nothing to discuss. Michael adjusted Sophie in his arms, her small body warm against his chest. I'm taking her somewhere safe until proper authorities can investigate this situation. You'll never make it out of Pine Ridge, Greg warned, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. Brooks owns this town. We'll see about that. Michael backed toward the door, never taking his eyes off Greg and Marcus. The latter had partially drawn what appeared to be a handgun from inside his jacket, keeping it concealed from the other patrons, but visible to Michael. Outside, Kevin had pulled the truck up directly in front of the boutique. Michael backed toward it, keeping Sophie's body shielded with his own. This isn't over, Greg called after them. As he spoke, he casually flicked his cigarette aside. The still-burning butt landed in a decorative bale of hay beside the door part of the boutique's winter display. Within seconds, the dry material had caught flames licking upward with alarming speed. Women screamed as smoke began to fill the boutique. Greg and Vanessa used the distraction to push past Michael toward their vehicle, while Marcus headed in the opposite direction, already speaking urgently into a cell phone. Kevin jumped from the truck, helping Michael secure Sophie in the back seat. The fire's spreading fast, he warned. We need to go now. The flames had indeed jumped from the hay bale to the boutique's wooden facade, smoke billowing upward into the winter sky. People were pouring out of nearby businesses, some already forming a bucket brigade from the town's central fountain. As they pulled away, Michael glanced in the rearview mirror. The scene behind them was chaos, snow, and firelight, and darkness, destruction spreading amidst desperate attempts to contain it. Beside him, Sophie sat quietly, her small hand finding his and holding tight. Are you really my daddy's friend? She asked, her voice small against the roar of the truck's engine. Michael squeezed her hand gently. I am, and I'm going to keep you safe, Sophie, I promise. As they drove away from Pine Ridge, snow began to fall once more, gradually erasing their tracks on the road behind them. The old mountain road twisted through dense pine forest snow, falling in thick curtains that the wipers fought to clear. Michael drove with tense concentration, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, though the snow had already obscured their tracks. Beside him, Sophie sat silently, her small face pale in the dashboard light, eyes fixed on the swirling white beyond the windshield. We'll be there soon, Michael said, his voice gentle against the hum of the heater. Just a little farther up this road. Sophie nodded but didn't speak. She hadn't said a word since they'd left Pine Ridge behind, as if the reality of what was happening had rendered her speechless. The toy bear Kevin had grabbed from the truck's emergency kit lay untouched in her lap, its plastic eyes staring upward at nothing. The cabin appeared through the snowfall like a mirage, a dark silhouette against the white landscape. It was modest but solid, built of thick timber to withstand mountain winters. Michael pulled the truck into the sheltered area beneath a stand of towering pines and cut the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by the soft patter of snow against the windshield and the ticking of the cooling engine. This is your house? Sophie asked, her voice small. One of them, Michael replied. I don't come here much anymore, but I keep it stocked for emergencies. He studied her face, searching for signs of fear. Are you cold hungry? She considered this with the seriousness only children can bring to simple questions. Both, she decided finally. Michael smiled, a genuine warmth that reached his eyes. Then let's get you inside. The cabin interior was cold but dry. Michael moved efficiently, lighting the wood stove with kindling and logs stored beside it. Sophie stood in the middle of the main room, taking in the simple furnishings, a worn leather sofa, a wooden table with 4 chairs, bookshelves lining one wall. The windows were already frosting at the corners, the glass reflecting the growing light from the wood stove. You can put your coat on the hook there, Michael said, pointing to a row of wooden pegs by the door. I'll check the generator and get some lights on. By the time he returned from the small utility room at the rear of the cabin, Sophie had removed her coat and boots. She looked even smaller without them, her thin frame nearly swallowed by the oversized sweater she wore beneath. She was studying a framed photograph on the bookshelf, standing on tiptoe to see it properly. That's you, she said as Michael approached. She pointed at the younger version of himself in desert camouflage arm, slung around another soldier's shoulders. And that's my daddy. Michael nodded, something tightening in his chest. It was taken in Afghanistan during our second tour. Sophie traced her father's face through the glass. You really were his friend. The best friend I ever had, Michael said quietly. She looked up at him, then her dark eyes searching his face. Did he ask you to come find me for real? Michael knelt down, bringing himself to her level despite the protest from his bruised ribs. For real, he made me promise to look out for you if anything ever happened to him. I should have come sooner, Sophie. I'm sorry I didn't. She considered this, her small face solemn. Vanessa said my daddy didn't have any friends. She said he was a bad person who left us on purpose. Anger flared in Michael's chest, but he kept his voice steady. Your father was a good man, Sophie. The very best kind. He loved you more than anything in the world. I know, she said simply. That's why I take flowers to him. So he knows I remember. You go to the cemetery alone even in the winter. She nodded, a hint of pride in her expression. I sneak out when they're sleeping. I take the flowers Mrs. Johnson gives me from her winter garden. I wrap them in plastic so they don't freeze. Her small shoulders straightened. It's not that far. Michael was silent for a moment, overwhelmed by the courage of this child who had endured so much yet still found ways to honor her father. You're very brave, Sophie. Just like him. The cabin was warming now, the wood stove radiating blessed heat that chased away the chill. Michael prepared a simple meal from the supplies stored in the pantry: soup, heated on the wood stove, crackers, and dried fruit. Sophie ate hungrily, some color returning to her pale cheeks. After dinner, exhaustion caught up with her. Michael showed her to the cabin's single bedroom, where a queen-sized bed dominated the space. From his duffel bag, he produced a worn teddy bear with a small knitted cap. Kevin thought you might like this, he said, offering it to her. It was his when he was little. Sophie accepted the bear, studying it with serious consideration before hugging it to her chest. Thank you, she whispered. As Michael turned to leave, her small voice stopped him. The people from town will come looking for us, won't they? He paused in the doorway. There was no point lying to her. She had seen too much already. Probably, but they won't find us here. This place is well hidden, and the storm will cover our tracks. She nodded, seeming to accept this. Then, with the directness only children possess, she asked, Are you going to be my new daddy now? The question caught him off guard. I'm going to keep you safe, Sophie. That's what your father would want. This seemed to satisfy her. She settled under the thick quilt, the borrowed teddy bear tucked against her side. Within minutes, her breathing deepened into sleep, the events of the day finally claiming their toll. Michael stood watching her for a long moment, struck by how small she looked in the large bed. Then he moved quietly back to the main room, his mind turning to the challenges ahead. The satellite phone he kept at the cabin had a weak but functional signal. He dialed a number from memory, glancing out the window at the snow still falling thick and fast. After 3 rings, a woman's voice answered, alert despite the late hour. Morgan? Rebecca Morgan. My name is Michael Westbrook. Pastor William gave me your number. He said you're investigating Maxwell Brooks. There was a brief silence on the line. Where are you calling from, Mr. Westbrook? This isn't a Pine Ridge number. I'm not in Pine Ridge anymore. I have James Carter's daughter with me. Another pause, longer this time. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice had sharpened with interest. You got her out? How? It's complicated. The important thing is she's safe for now, but I need help. Legal help, evidence that will stand up in court. You're talking about taking on one of the most powerful men in the state, Rebecca said. Brooks has connections in the governor's office, in state police, and the courts. I found evidence that James Carter's property transfer was forged. Brooks's people took my phone with the photos, but the records are still there. That's a start, but not enough. Rebecca's voice lowered. Listen, Westbrook, I've been investigating Brooks for 8 months. It goes way beyond property fraud. There's a reason they were sending Sophie to that special school. What reason? Brooks is running more than lumber through his transportation network. I have sources that suggest he's involved in human trafficking, using the school as a staging ground. Children from troubled homes, foster kids, easy targets. No one will miss. Michael glanced toward the bedroom where Sophie slept. Why, Sophie? She's not a foster child. She has family. That's what I've been trying to figure out, Rebecca replied. There's something special about her case. Something worth the risk of taking James Carter's daughter. The property, Michael said slowly, the pieces connecting in his mind. James left everything to Sophie. If Vanessa married Peterson and Peterson had legal custody of Sophie, Then Brooks gets the land he's been after for years, Rebecca finished. But there's something else. I need to look into the trust documents, see exactly what James Carter left behind. Can you meet me tomorrow? Not in Pine Ridge. Brooks will have people watching for us. There's a diner in Carlton about 30 miles east of you, Trudy's place. I can be there at noon. We'll be there. Michael paused. Be careful, Ms. Morgan. These people don't play by any rules. I've been covering corruption for 15 years, Mr. Westbrook. I know how to watch my back. She hesitated. How's the little girl? Michael looked again toward the bedroom. Stronger than anyone should have to be at her age. Keep her that way, Rebecca said softly. I'll see you tomorrow. The call ended, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts and the soft crackling of the wood stove. Outside, the storm intensified, wind driving snow against the cabin in rhythmic waves. He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. Somewhere out there, Brooks and his men would be organizing a search, but the mountains were vast and the storm a powerful ally. For tonight, at least they were safe. Michael settled on the couch, wincing as his bruised body protested. Sleep would be elusive, but rest was necessary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Sophie would need him at full strength. Dawn broke gray and muted the storm, having passed in the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Every surface was blanketed in pristine white tree branches, bowing under the weight of snow. Michael stood on the cabin's small porch, coffee mug, steaming in the frigid air, surveying their surroundings with a soldier's practiced eye. No tracks marred the perfect snow. No distant engines disturbed the mountain silence. For now, their isolation was complete. The cabin door opened behind him, and Sophie emerged wrapped in a quilt, her hair tousled from sleep. It stopped, she said, looking up at the clear sky. For now. Michael nodded. More coming tonight, according to the weather radio. Sophie leaned against the porch railing, her breath creating small clouds. It's pretty here. Quiet. It is. Michael studied her profile, noting how the morning light softened the shadows under her eyes. Did you sleep okay? She nodded. I dreamed about my daddy. He was smiling. Michael felt that now familiar tightness in his chest. That sounds like a good dream. It was. She looked up at him with unexpected earnestness. I brought something with me, from the house. I wasn't supposed to have it, but I kept it hidden. From beneath the quilt, she produced a small object, a worn teddy bear much older than the one Kevin had provided. Its fur was matted in places, one eye slightly loose, but it had clearly been well loved. Daddy gave this to me before he went away the last time. Sophie held it carefully like something precious. Vanessa said she threw it away, but I found it in the trash and hid it. Michael gently touched the small bear's head. He looks like he's been through a lot. His name is Sergeant, Sophie said solemnly. Daddy said he would protect me when he couldn't be there. Her small face clouded. But then Vanessa found out I still had him, and she got really mad. She locked him in the secret room. Michael tensed slightly. Secret room. Sophie nodded, her expression troubled. In the basement. There's a door behind the big shelves. That's where they keep things they don't want anyone to see. What kind of things, Sophie? She shrugged, hugging Sergeant closer. Papers and boxes. Sometimes Richard takes people down there at night. I'm not supposed to know about it, but I saw once when I was getting water after bedtime. Michael considered this new information, his mind already calculating what it might mean. A hidden room in the Peterson house could contain evidence of Brooks's operations, perhaps even proof of the property fraud. How did you get Sergeant back? He asked. Sophie's expression turned proud. I waited until they were having a party. Lots of people were there, and they weren't watching me. I snuck down and got him. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That's when I saw the pictures. What pictures? Of kids, on the big computer screen. Richard was showing them to some men. They had numbers on them like price tags at the store. The implications hit Michael like a physical blow. Rebecca's suspicions about human trafficking were right, and Sophie had witnessed it firsthand. Sophie, he said carefully, what you saw is very important. Those men were doing something very wrong. When we meet Miss Morgan today, do you think you could tell her what you just told me? Sophie considered this, her small face serious. Will it help get the bad men? I think it might. She nodded decisively. Then I'll tell her. Daddy always said we should help stop bad people from doing bad things. Michael smiled, though his heart ached at the wisdom this child had been forced to acquire. Your daddy was right. Now let's get some breakfast. We have a drive ahead of us. They were finishing their meal when the satellite phone rang. Michael answered, expecting Rebecca. Instead, Kevin's frantic voice filled the line. They know where you are. Brooks has men on the way up the mountain right now. Michael moved to the window, scanning the horizon. How the storm covered our tracks. Someone at the general store recognized you yesterday when you were stocking up. Called it in for the reward Brooks is offering. Kevin's voice dropped. There's more. I followed Marcus and Greg last night up to the old military bunker in the North Woods. R9, Michael said softly. The designation stirred old memories, a storage facility his and James's unit had used during training exercises years ago. Yes, they're keeping documents there, lots of them. I managed to get photos of some files labeled Carter Trust. Michael, they're planning to transfer all of Sophie's inheritance tonight before anyone can challenge the guardianship. Did you get clear? Are you safe? Kevin's breathing was labored, as if he were moving quickly. I think they spotted me. I'm heading for Pastor Williams now. He'll know what to... The line went dead. Michael tried calling him back, but there was no answer. He pocketed the phone and moved with military efficiency, gathering their essential supplies. Sophie, we need to leave, right now. She was already pulling on her boots, sensing the urgency in his voice. Are the bad men coming? Yes, but we're going to stay ahead of them. He helped her into her coat, then knelt to look her in the eye. I need you to be brave again, okay? Like your daddy would be. She nodded, clutching Sergeant the Bear in one hand. I can be brave. They left the cabin 10 minutes later, the truck's engine breaking the mountain silence. Michael drove carefully, but quickly, taking a logging road that branched away from the main approach. It was narrower and less maintained, but it would keep them away from anyone coming up the standard route. The truck's tires crunched through fresh snow, the vehicle fishtailing slightly on the steeper sections. Sophie sat quietly beside him, her face solemn but composed. The stuffed bear was tucked securely in her coat, only its worn head visible at her collar. They had just rounded a sharp curve when Michael spotted the vehicle ahead, a black SUV identical to the one Greg Peterson had driven in town. It was parked sideways across the narrow road, effectively blocking their path. Two men stood beside it, rifles clearly visible in their hands. Michael braked carefully, bringing the truck to a stop 50 yards from the roadblock. His mind raced through options, none of them good. The forest was too thick on either side for the truck to bypass the SUV. Backing up would only delay the inevitable. They'd be followed and caught on the winding mountain roads. Who are they? Sophie asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. People who work for Mr. Brooks, Michael answered truthfully. Stay low in your seat, Sophie. Whatever happens, don't get out of the truck unless I tell you to. He put the truck in reverse, beginning a slow retreat, eyes fixed on the men who were now approaching on foot. The logging road narrowed behind them, hemmed in by steep embankments on both sides. Michael checked the rear-view mirror, heart sinking as he spotted another vehicle appearing around the bend, behind them, cutting off their escape. They were trapped. Mr. Westbrook, Sophie's small voice pulled his attention back to her. She was looking out her window, pointing towards something in the trees. There's a path there, like the ones at the park. Michael followed her gaze and spotted what she had seen, a narrow trail leading away from the road into the forest. It was barely visible, just a slight depression in the snow, where the evergreen canopy had prevented the full accumulation. Good eyes, Sophie. He quickly assessed their options. The truck couldn't navigate that trail, but they could go on foot. The forest would provide cover, and if they could reach the ridge beyond, they might be able to circle back to the main road. The men from both vehicles were converging now, moving with the confidence of predators who knew their prey was cornered. Michael reached under his seat and retrieved the pistol he had brought from the cabin. Sophie's eyes widened at the sight of it. Are you going to shoot them? She whispered. Michael tucked the weapon into his jacket. Only if I have to. We're going to try something else first. He pointed to the trail she had spotted. We're going to use that path, but we need to create a distraction. Reaching into the back seat, he grabbed the emergency flare kit. Working quickly, he removed a flare, rolled down his window slightly, and struck it. The magnesium ignited with a blinding flare of crimson that hissed and sputtered in the cold air. Michael threw it as far as he could toward the men approaching from behind. The flare landed in a snowbank beside the road, instantly melting a crater and sending up a plume of steam and smoke. In the confusion that followed, Michael grabbed Sophie and their emergency pack slipping out the passenger side door and into the shelter of the trees before the men could reorient themselves. "Stay close," he whispered, guiding Sophie toward the trail. The snow was deep enough to make walking difficult, especially for her short legs, but the path offered slightly clearer going where previous hikers had packed down the snow. Behind them, shouts echoed as their escape was discovered. Michael quickened their pace, half carrying Sophie when the snow became too deep. The forest closed around them, pine branches heavy with snow, occasionally dumping their loads when disturbed, creating brief localized blizzards that helped obscure their trail. Sophie moved with surprising determination, her face set with concentration. When she stumbled, she pushed herself up without complaint. When her breath came in ragged gasps, she simply gripped Michael's hand tighter and pressed on. They had been climbing for nearly 30 minutes when the distant crack of a rifle shot split the winter silence. Michael pulled Sophie behind the broad trunk of an old pine, listening intently. Their pursuers were still on the trail, though the density of the forest made it difficult to pinpoint their exact location. "We need to keep moving," he whispered to Sophie. "The ridge is just ahead. Once we're over it, we can make better time going down the other side." She nodded, her face flushed with exertion. "I can do it." They continued upward, the trail becoming steeper and less distinct. Michael was counting on their pursuers being unfamiliar with these woods, unlike himself, who had hunted this area for years. If they could reach the ridgeline, he knew a network of trails that could eventually lead them to the highway where Rebecca might be able to meet them. The ridge appeared through the trees, a rocky outcropping that marked the highest point of the trail. Michael helped Sophie navigate the final stretch, lifting her over fallen logs and guiding her around patches of ice. Finally, they emerged onto the exposed ridgeline, the vista opening before them to reveal miles of snow-covered forest stretching toward distant mountains. "We made it," Sophie said, her breath clouding in the frigid air. "Halfway," Michael corrected gently. "Now we need to get down the other side." As if in answer, the crack of another rifle shot echoed across the ridge, closer this time. Michael pulled Sophie down behind a rock formation, scanning the forest edge they had just exited. Movement caught his eye, two figures in white winter camouflage emerging from the tree-line, rifles raised. "Change of plans," Michael whispered. "We need to move along the ridge instead of down. Can you do that for me?" Sophie nodded, her eyes wide but determined. Michael led her in a crouch along the rocky spine of the ridge, using the natural formations as cover. The terrain was treacherous, ice coating many of the rocks, but it offered better protection than the exposed slopes below. They had covered perhaps 200 yards when Sophie suddenly stopped tugging at Michael's sleeve. "Listen," she whispered. At first he heard nothing beyond the wind whistling across the ridge. Then it came to him, the distinctive thump, thump, thump of helicopter rotors growing steadily louder. "Down," he ordered, pulling Sophie flat against the rocks as a black helicopter crested the far side of the ridge, hovering like a predatory bird. Through the windscreen, Michael could make out the pilot and a passenger, the latter raising binoculars to scan the ridge. "Brooks," Michael muttered, recognizing the figure even at this distance. Sophie pressed closer to him, her small body trembling slightly. "He's looking for us." "Yes, but he won't find us." Michael surveyed their surroundings, looking for any advantage. The helicopter complicated matters significantly, its aerial perspective negating much of the cover the forest had provided. The ridge continued for another half-mile before dipping back into forest. They would be exposed the entire way, easy targets for either the ground pursuers or the helicopter. Their only advantage was the approaching weather. Dark clouds were building to the west, promising another storm before nightfall. Michael made his decision. "We're going to have to go down after all, but not on the trail. There's a steeper way through those trees." He pointed to a section of the slope where pines grew densely all the way to the ridge. "It's going to be tough, but those trees will hide us from the helicopter." Sophie looked at the steep slope dubiously but nodded. "Like sledding without a sled." Despite everything, Michael smiled. "Something like that. I'll go first and you follow right behind me." They moved to the edge of the ridge where the pines grew closest. The drop was significant, perhaps 50 feet of near vertical descent before the slope moderated somewhat. Michael went over first, using tree trunks and exposed roots as handholds, testing each step before committing his weight. "Okay, Sophie, just like I did, nice and slow." She began her descent with the careful determination he had come to expect from her. Despite her small size, she moved with surprising confidence, mimicking his path exactly. They were halfway down the steepest section when disaster struck. Sophie's foot dislodged a rock, sending it tumbling down the slope. The noise was minimal, but the movement caught the attention of the helicopter pilot. The aircraft banked sharply, rotors churning the air as it maneuvered for a better view. "Hurry!" Michael called, abandoning caution for speed. They scrambled down the remaining steep section, Michael reaching the bottom first. He turned to help Sophie for the final few feet when the helicopter appeared directly overhead, its downdraft sending snow and loose debris cascading around them. Sophie lost her grip, sliding the last 6 feet into Michael's waiting arms. He immediately pulled her into the denser forest, using the trees for cover, as the helicopter hovered stubbornly above the spot where they had descended. "They saw us," Sophie gasped, clinging to Michael as they ran in a crouch through the underbrush. "They saw something," Michael corrected, "but these woods are too thick for them to follow easily. We still have a chance." They pushed on through deepening snow, the forest growing denser as they descended the far side of the ridge. The helicopter's noise faded intermittently as it circled, trying to reacquire its targets through the thick canopy. Occasionally, rifle shots rang out as the ground pursuers fired at shadows or movement, but none came dangerously close. After what seemed an eternity, they broke from the forest onto a narrow service road, little more than a dirt track, completely covered in snow, but clearly man-made. "Where are we?" Sophie asked, breathing hard from their exertions. Michael oriented himself quickly. "Fire road. It connects to the highway about 3 miles east." He checked his watch. "We missed our meeting with Ms. Morgan, but maybe we can still reach her." The satellite phone had survived their escape, though the signal was weak in the valley. Michael dialed Rebecca's number, keeping his voice low as the call connected. "Morgan, it's Westbrook. We ran into trouble. Brooks has men in the mountains and a helicopter." "I heard." Rebecca's voice was tense. "There's a bolo out for you kidnapping charges. Every cop in the county is looking for your truck." "We're on foot now, Fire Road 22, heading east toward the highway. Any chance you can meet us?" "I'll try. There's something else you should know. Kevin made it to the church, but he's in bad shape. Pastor William called me an hour ago." Michael felt a twinge of guilt. Kevin had risked everything to help them, and now he was paying the price. "Did he get the evidence from R9? "Some of it. Enough to raise serious questions about the Carter Trust and the property transfers. I'm working on a story, but I need more." "We'll get you more," Michael promised. "Just get us out of these mountains." "I'll be there in 40 minutes. Mile marker 115 on the highway. There's an access point to the fire road there. We'll be waiting." The call ended, leaving them in silence, broken only by the distant thrum of the helicopter still searching the far side of the ridge. "Who's Kevin?" Sophie asked as they began walking along the snow-covered road. "A friend. He's been helping us." Michael kept his tone light, not wanting to worry her further. "He found some important papers that might help prove your dad's property was stolen." Sophie trudged beside him, her earlier energy flagging, though she made no complaint. "Is he going to be okay?" "I hope so," Michael answered honestly. They walked in silence for a time, the fire road gently descending through winter woods. The helicopter's sound had faded entirely, though Michael knew that didn't mean Brooks had given up. More likely, the aircraft had returned to refuel while the ground teams continued the search. After nearly a mile, Sophie stumbled, exhaustion finally catching up to her small body. Michael swept her into his arms without breaking stride, her slight weight barely registering despite his own fatigue. "You can put me down," she protested weakly. "I can walk." "I know you can," Michael replied. "But sometimes even brave soldiers need to rest." She relented, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice soft. "Mr. Westbrook, what's going to happen to us?" The question held no fear, only a child's honest curiosity about her future. Michael considered his answer carefully. "First, we're going to meet Ms. Morgan and get somewhere safe. Then we're going to make sure the truth comes out about what Brooks and the Petersons have done. And then—" Michael looked down at her face, so trusting despite everything she'd endured. "And then we'll make sure you're taken care of, just like your father would want." Sophie nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "My daddy used to say that even in the coldest snow, good hearts still stay warm." She looked up at him with solemn eyes. "I think you have a good heart, Mr. Westbrook." Michael felt something shift inside him, a wall of ice that had formed around his heart beginning to crack and thaw. "I'm trying, Sophie. For you and for your dad, I'm trying." They continued along the fire road as the afternoon light began to fade. In the west, the approaching storm darkened the horizon, promising more snow before nightfall. Michael increased his pace, Sophie secure in his arms, determination driving him forward toward the promise of safety and the chance to finally fulfill his promise to James. Behind them, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of engines, snowmobiles cutting through the forest, closing the distance with mechanical efficiency. Brooks's men had found their trail again. The race was on, with Sophie's future hanging in the balance. The snowmobile engines grew louder, mechanical wolves hunting through the winter forest. Michael calculated the distance to the highway, still over a mile too far to outrun their pursuers. He scanned their surroundings with tactical precision, looking for any advantage the terrain might offer. "I hear them coming," Sophie whispered, her small body tensing in his arms. "I know," Michael replied calmly. "We need to find cover." 50 yards ahead, the fire road crossed a narrow ravine spanned by a wooden bridge. Beyond it, the forest thickened again, offering better concealment. If they could reach those trees, they might still evade capture. Michael quickened his pace, ignoring the protest from his injured ribs. Sophie clung to him silently, her trust absolute, as they raced toward the bridge. The snowmobile engines sounded closer now, perhaps only minutes behind them. They were halfway across the bridge when Michael spotted their salvation, a steep embankment beneath the crossing, partially hollowed out by spring runoff. He lowered Sophie to her feet. "Under the bridge," he whispered, guiding her toward the edge. "We'll hide down there until they pass." Sophie nodded, understanding immediately. Michael helped her down the slope, then followed, pressing them both into the shadowed recess beneath the wooden structure. Snow had drifted against the ravine walls, creating a natural blind that would hide them from casual observation. "Don't make a sound," Michael cautioned, drawing Sophie close as the snowmobiles approached. The machines roared onto the bridge above them, their weight causing the aged timbers to creak and shed dust. Sophie buried her face against Michael's coat, her small body trembling slightly. Michael held her tighter, one hand resting protectively on her head. The snowmobiles slowed at the far side of the bridge, engines dropping to idling growls. Male voices carried clearly in the winter air. "Tracks end here," one said. "They might have left the road." "Check both sides," another commanded. "Brooks wants them found before dark." Boots crunched on the snow-covered bridge, moving back and forth as the men searched for signs of their quarry. A beam of light swept the ravine beneath, passing just above their hiding place. Michael held his breath, willing Sophie to remain still. After what seemed an eternity, the light withdrew. "Nothing," called the searcher. "Let's try farther down." The engines revved again as the snowmobiles continued along the fire road, their sound gradually fading into the distance. Still, Michael waited, counting slowly to 300 before daring to move. "Are they gone?" Sophie whispered. "For now." Michael helped her up. "But they'll be back when they don't find our tracks ahead. We need to move away from the road." Rather than climbing back to the fire road, Michael led Sophie along the bottom of the ravine, where the overhanging trees had prevented heavy snow accumulation. The going was difficult, slippery rocks and patches of ice requiring careful navigation, but it would leave minimal tracks for their pursuers to follow. They had traveled perhaps half a mile through the ravine when Sophie tugged urgently at Michael's sleeve. "Listen." At first, Michael heard nothing beyond the soft gurgle of water beneath ice and their own breathing. Then it came to him, church bells, faint but unmistakable, carried on the winter wind. "Someone's ringing the alarm bell at the church," Michael said, recognizing the irregular pattern, not the measured toll of normal services, but the frantic clanging of emergency. Sophie's face paled. "Is it because of us?" Before Michael could answer, his satellite phone vibrated. He answered quickly, keeping his voice low. "Westbrook, it's Rebecca. Are you near the highway yet?" "No, Brooks's men found our trail. We had to go off-road. What's happening? We can hear church bells." Rebecca's voice was tight with tension. "The church is on fire. Pastor William and Kevin are trapped inside. Brooks's men have blocked the doors." "Where are you?" Michael demanded. "Just passing mile marker 112. I can see the smoke from here." Michael made a split-second decision. "Change of plans. Meet us at the church. We're closer to it than the highway anyway." "That's insane," Rebecca protested. "Brooks's people are everywhere. Kevin and Pastor William risked everything to help us. I'm not leaving them to die." Michael's tone left no room for argument. "Just get there and call the state police. This has gone beyond what local authorities can handle." He ended the call and knelt before Sophie. "There's trouble at the church. Our friends need help." Sophie looked at him steadily, wisdom beyond her years in her dark eyes. "We have to go help them, don't we?" Michael nodded. "Yes, but it might be dangerous." She squared her small shoulders. "My daddy wouldn't leave his friends. Neither should we." Once again, her courage humbled him. "You're right, let's go." They abandoned the ravine where it curved away from their destination, climbing back to level ground and setting off through the forest toward Pine Ridge. The church lay on the town's eastern edge, perhaps 2 miles from their current position. With luck, they could reach it before darkness fell completely. As they moved through the deepening shadows of late afternoon, Michael's mind raced through scenarios, none of them promising. Brooks had clearly decided to eliminate all opposition in one decisive move. The burning church would serve dual purposes, destroying Kevin's evidence and sending a message to anyone else who might stand against him. The forest thinned as they approached the outskirts of Pine Ridge, forcing them to move more cautiously. Smoke was visible now, a dark plume rising into the winter sky. The church bells had stopped. They paused at the edge of the tree line, surveying the scene before them. The church stood on a slight rise, flames already visible through the stained glass windows. A ring of onlookers had gathered at a distance, their faces illuminated by the growing blaze. But no one approached the burning building. 2 black SUVs blocked the main entrance, and Michael could make out armed figures ensuring no one interfered. "There are people inside," Sophie whispered, horror in her voice. "We'll get them out," Michael promised, though he had no idea how. Movement at the edge of the gathering caught his eye, a woman emerging from a dark sedan parked on a side street. Even at this distance, he recognized Rebecca Morgan, her red hair distinctive against the snow. "Wait here," Michael instructed Sophie, positioning her behind a large pine where she would remain hidden, but could still observe. "I need to talk to that lady with the red hair. Don't move until I come back for you." "Promise?" Sophie asked, clutching Sergeant the Bear tightly. "Promise." Michael squeezed her shoulder reassuringly, then slipped away, circling through the trees to approach Rebecca's position from behind. She sensed his presence before he spoke journalist's instincts, making her turn sharply as he emerged from the shadows. Relief flooded her features. "Thank God," she breathed. "Where's the girl?" "Safe for the moment," Michael replied, his eyes on the burning church. "What's the situation?" Rebecca's expression was grim. "Brooks's men started the fire about 20 minutes ago. Pastor William and Kevin are trapped inside. The local fire department has been delayed by a convenient accident blocking the road from the station. And the state police, on their way, but it'll be at least half an hour before they arrive." She hesitated. "It might be too late by then." Michael studied the church, identifying possible entry points. The main doors were blocked, but the sacristy entrance on the north side appeared unguarded. If he could reach it— "I need a distraction," he said. "Something to draw those men away from the building, even just for a minute." Rebecca nodded, understanding immediately. "I can do that. Give me 2 minutes." As she hurried back to her car, Michael returned to Sophie. "I'm going into the church to help our friends," he explained. "I need you to stay with Ms. Morgan. She'll keep you safe until I come back." Sophie's face was solemn in the firelight. "You're going into the fire?" "Yes." She reached into her coat and removed Sergeant the Bear, pressing him into Michael's hands. "Take him. Daddy said he protects people." The simple gesture nearly undid him. Michael accepted the worn bear, tucking it carefully into his jacket pocket. "I'll bring him back to you, I promise." Sophie nodded gravely. "Be careful." Michael led her to where Rebecca waited beside her car, making swift introductions. Sophie regarded the journalist with cautious assessment before accepting her outstretched hand. "Ready?" Rebecca asked Michael, her eyes reflecting the distant flames. "Do it." Rebecca drove her car directly toward the church horn, blaring continuously. As she approached the gathered crowd, she swerved, deliberately sliding on the snow and crashing into one of the black SUVs with a metallic crunch. The impact was controlled, damaging, but not dangerous, yet it created exactly the distraction Michael needed. As Brooks's men rushed toward the commotion, Michael sprinted for the north side of the church. Smoke billowed from broken windows, and heat radiated from the walls as he reached the sacristy door. It was locked but yielded to a powerful kick, swinging inward to release a rush of superheated air. Michael pulled his scarf over his mouth and plunged into the inferno. The interior was a hellscape of fire and smoke, pews already burning the old wooden structure, feeding the flames with terrifying efficiency. The air was nearly unbreathable, visibility reduced to mere feet. "William Kevin!" Michael shouted, pushing deeper into the church. A sound answered him, faint coughing from the direction of the altar. Michael moved toward it, staying low where the air was marginally clearer. He found them behind the altar rail, Pastor William supporting Kevin's semi-conscious form, both men trapped by fallen debris from the ceiling. "Michael," William gasped, his face streaked with soot. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," Michael replied, already assessing the situation. A burning beam blocked their path, too heavy for the elderly pastor to move while supporting Kevin. "The boy first," William insisted, helping Michael lift Kevin's limp form. Together, they maneuvered Kevin past the burning beam, Michael taking his full weight as they navigated toward the door. Outside, fresh snowfall had begun, the flakes hissing and evaporating as they met the heat radiating from the burning church. Rebecca rushed forward as Michael emerged with Kevin, helping lower the young man to the snow a safe distance from the building. "Pastor William," she asked anxiously, "still inside. Watch him." Michael turned back toward the church, but Rebecca caught his arm. "The roof is about to go," she warned, pointing to where flames had consumed most of the wooden structure. Michael shook her off, determination overriding caution. "I'm not leaving him." He re-entered the burning building, heat searing his lungs with each breath. The fire had spread rapidly in just the short time he'd been outside, entire sections of the ceiling now engulfed. He found Pastor William still behind the altar, no longer trying to escape, but instead struggling to reach something in the tabernacle. "We have to go," Michael shouted over the roar of the flames. "Now!" William turned, clutching a leather-bound book to his chest. "The evidence?" he gasped. "Kevin's photos, coordinates to R9. A thunderous crack split the air as a major support beam gave way, showering them with burning debris. Michael lunged forward, grabbing the pastor's arm and dragging him toward the exit. They had nearly reached the door when a secondary collapse brought down a portion of the roof directly in their path. William stumbled, dropping to one knee. "Go," he urged, pressing the book into Michael's hands. "This matters more than I do." "Both matter," Michael insisted, pulling the older man to his feet. The heat was unbearable now, the very air seeming to ignite around them. In desperation, Michael spotted a stained glass window not yet consumed by flames. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arm around William, shielding the pastor's head as he charged toward the window. The ancient glass shattered under their combined weight, momentarily slicing Michael's exposed skin before they tumbled into blessed coldness outside. They landed hard in a snowbank as behind them, the church roof collapsed entirely, sending a geyser of sparks into the night sky. Rebecca and Sophie rushed to them, helping them away from the falling debris. Pastor William's face was gray with smoke and exhaustion, but he clutched Michael's arm with surprising strength. "The book," he rasped. "Keep it safe." Michael patted his jacket where he had secured the volume. "I will." Sophie threw her arms around Michael's waist, burying her face against him. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised, didn't I?" Michael retrieved Sergeant the Bear from his pocket, slightly singed but intact, and returned him to Sophie. "He did good work in there." In the distance, sirens wailed, state police finally arriving too late to save the church, but perhaps in time to change the tide of this unequal conflict. Brooks's men had already retreated their SUVs, disappearing into the snowy night. Kevin regained consciousness as they loaded him into Rebecca's car, his eyes focusing on Michael with relief. "You got Sophie out," he murmured. "Good. Rest," Michael advised. "We're not done yet." The leather book contained exactly what Pastor William had claimed: Kevin's photographs of documents from the R9 bunker, detailed enough to identify specific criminal activities, and a hand-drawn map showing the bunker's precise location. Most valuable was a complete copy of James Carter's trust documents, revealing that Sophie wasn't just heir to the property, but to a significant timber fortune her father had inherited from his own grandfather. "Brooks wants more than just the land," Rebecca said, as they reviewed the materials at Elizabeth Johnson's house. "The Carter Trust controls nearly 30% of the sustainable forest rights in this region. With Sophie under his control, he'd have a monopoly." Michael nodded grimly. "And sending her to that school would ensure no one asked questions until everything was transferred." The state police had established a command post in Pine Ridge, their presence temporarily driving Brooks and his associates underground. But Michael harbored no illusions. This was merely a tactical retreat, not surrender. The evidence they had was damning, but still circumstantial. They needed the original documents. "We have to get into R9, he told Rebecca, "tonight before Brooks can move or destroy what's there." "The police," she began. "Move too slowly," Michael interrupted. "Brooks has connections at the state level. By the time they get a warrant, those documents will be ashes." Rebecca studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "What's your plan?" "You stay here with Sophie. Keep her safe." He turned to Elizabeth and Kevin, the latter still recovering, but alert. "Kevin's map shows an access point to R9 that's not on any official records. I'm going in alone." "Not alone," Pastor William countered, his voice rough from smoke inhalation but determined. "I'm coming with you." Michael started to protest, but the elderly pastor raised a hand to silence him. "I've stood on the sidelines too long, watched evil flourish because good men did nothing. Not anymore." In the corner, Sophie sat quietly watching the adults with solemn eyes. "Mr. Westbrook," she called softly. Michael knelt beside him. "Yes, Sophie, when you find the secret papers, will Vanessa and Richard go to jail?" The directness of a child cutting through pretense to the heart of the matter. "Probably," Michael answered honestly. Sophie considered this, her small face thoughtful. "I don't hate Vanessa," she said finally. "She was nice sometimes before Richard came. She just got scared." Michael was continually amazed by this child's capacity for understanding. "Being scared makes people do wrong things sometimes," he agreed, "but they still have to answer for them." Sophie nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "Be careful at the bunker," she said, repeating his earlier words to her. "I'll wait right here until you come back." An hour later, Michael and Pastor William approached the R9 bunker. From the north, using the hidden access point Kevin had documented. The night was clear now, stars shimmering coldly in the winter sky, the fresh snow creating an ethereal landscape of blue-white shadow. They moved silently through the trees, their breath forming ghost clouds in the frigid air. The bunker entrance was camouflaged, a concrete structure disguised as a natural rock formation. Only the small electronic keypad revealed its true nature. "Kevin got the code from Brooks's computer," William whispered, entering a sequence. The heavy door released with a hydraulic hiss, swinging outward to reveal a dark passage descending into the earth. They entered cautiously, flashlights illuminating metal walls streaked with condensation. The air was stale, but warmer than outside, preserved by the Earth's natural insulation. At the bottom of the stairs, another door confronted them. This one secured with a conventional lock that yielded to the set of picks Michael carried. The main chamber of R9 was larger than Michael expected, perhaps 30 feet square, its walls lined with metal shelving. Boxes and filing cabinets filled the space, meticulously organized and labeled. At the center stood a large table with a computer terminal currently dark. "They've documented everything," William breathed, shining his light across the shelves. "Land deeds, transfer documents, financial records." "Brooks always was thorough," a new voice observed from the shadows. Michael whirled, hand moving to the pistol concealed beneath his jacket. Greg Peterson stepped into the light in his own weapon already drawn and pointed directly at Michael's chest. "I figured someone would come," Greg continued conversationally. "Though I admit I expected the police, not a burned-out soldier and a preacher." Pastor William moved forward, placing himself partially between Michael and the gun. "It's over, Richard. The state police are in Pine Ridge. They know about Brooks's operation." Greg's smile was cold. "They suspect at best. Without these documents, they have nothing but the ramblings of a traumatized child." He gestured with the gun. "Step back, both of you." From the shadows behind Greg emerged two more figures, one Michael recognized as Travis Brooks's head of security. The other was Maxwell Brooks himself, elegant despite the setting in his cashmere overcoat. "Mr. Westbrook," Brooks acknowledged with a slight nod, "you've caused quite a commotion in my town." "Not your town," Michael countered. "Not anymore." Brooks's expression hardened. "I've built an empire here. Provided jobs, security, prosperity. And you think you can destroy all that over one insignificant child? A child whose inheritance you tried to steal," Pastor William interjected. "A child you were willing to traffic for profit." Brooks waved a dismissive hand. "Collateral damage. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Surely a man of God understands that calculation." A man of God understands there's no calculation that justifies harming children, William replied, his voice steady despite the gun now pointed at him. Where is Sophie now? Greg demanded. We need to finish this tonight before the state authorities start asking too many questions. Michael remained silent, his mind racing through options. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but he still had one advantage. Brooks and his men didn't know about the evidence already secured at Elizabeth's house. Brooks sighed theatrically. Mr. Westbrook, let me be clear. You will tell us where the Carter girl is, or Travis here will demonstrate why he was discharged from the military for excessive force during interrogations. A new sound interrupted the bunker door opening above, followed by light footsteps on the metal stairs. Hello, a female voice called. Richard, are you down there? Vanessa Peterson appeared in the doorway, her face pale in the harsh light. She froze at the tableau before her, the drawn weapons that tense standoff. What are you doing here? Greg demanded, clearly surprised by her arrival. I followed you, Vanessa replied, her voice small. You said you were just checking security at the storage facility. You lied to me, again. Her gaze moved to Michael, recognition dawning. You're James's friend, the one who took Sophie. Protected her, Michael corrected. From them, he gestured to Brooks and Greg. Do you know what they plan to do with her? Send her to a school that traffics children? All to get control of her inheritance. Uncertainty flickered across Vanessa's face. Richard said the school was for special children, for her own good. He lied, Pastor William said gently, just as he lied about James's property and about caring for Sophie. Brooks made an impatient sound. Enough of this. Vanessa, go back to the car. This doesn't concern you. But Vanessa remained where she stood, her eyes now fixed on a file box labeled Carter Trust, visible on a nearby shelf. You said all the documents were destroyed in the fire, she said to Greg, her voice hardening. More lies. Vanessa, Greg began. Did you kill James? She demanded, suddenly. Was his death in Afghanistan even real? Brooks stepped forward, his patience clearly exhausted. Mrs. Peterson, your husband and I have business to conclude. Please leave. She deserves to know the truth, Michael interjected. James died a hero, but his death was convenient for them. Too convenient. Greg's face twisted with anger. Shut up. He swung his gun toward Michael, finger tightening on the trigger. What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. Vanessa lunged toward Greg, knocking his arm upward as the gun discharged the bullet, embedding harmlessly in the concrete ceiling. Travis raised his own weapon, but Michael was already moving, closing the distance with military precision and disarming the larger man with a strike to the elbow. Brooks backed away, reaching inside his coat, but Pastor William tackled him with surprising strength for his age, sending them both crashing into the shelving unit. Files and boxes cascaded around them as they fell. Greg recovered quickly, shoving Vanessa aside and aiming at Michael again. This time it was Travis who intervened, his loyalties apparently shifting as he recognized the changing tide. He grappled with Greg, the two men crashing into the central table, sending equipment flying. Michael seized the opportunity, retrieving Travis's dropped weapon and training it on Brooks, who had extricated himself from the fallen shelving. Don't move, Michael ordered. It's over. But Brooks merely smiled, his hand emerging from his coat pocket with a small remote detonator. Insurance policy, he explained calmly. R9 was designed to be wiped clean in case of discovery. This will trigger charges throughout the bunker, eliminating all evidence and witnesses. His thumb hovered over the button. Now all of you will back out slowly while I consider my options. No one moved. In the sudden silence, a new sound became audible. Boots on the metal stairs, multiple sets moving with tactical precision. State police, a voice bellowed from the stairwell. Everyone on the ground now. Brooks's smile faltered. Before he could activate the detonator, Vanessa sprang forward with unexpected speed, knocking the device from his hand. It skittered across the floor, coming to rest at Michael's feet. Armed officers poured into the room, weapons raised. Rebecca Morgan followed them, a triumphant gleam in her eye. Perfect timing, Michael remarked as she approached. I called in some markers with the state attorney general, Rebecca explained. Turns out he's been looking for an excuse to investigate Brooks for years. As the police secured the room and began cataloging evidence, Michael turned to Vanessa, who stood alone now, arms wrapped protectively around herself. Why did you help us? He asked. She met his gaze, something like relief in her eyes. Sophie deserves better than what we did to her. what I allowed to happen. She hesitated. I loved James, at first, but after he died, I was alone and afraid. Richard offered security protection. A bitter laugh escaped her. Another lie. Outside, dawn was breaking as they emerged from the bunker. The forest was transformed by night snowfall, pristine white, stretching in every direction. State police vehicles surrounded the area, lights flashing silently against the snow. Officers led Brooks, Greg, and Travis in handcuffs toward separate cars. As Greg passed, he spat at Michael's feet. This isn't over. Brooks has friends in high places. So do I, Michael replied calmly. When they returned to Elizabeth Johnson's house, Sophie was waiting at the window, her small face pressed against the glass. She flew to the door as Michael entered, throwing herself into his arms with complete trust. You came back again, she said, her voice muffled against his coat. I always will. Michael promised, holding her close. The days that followed brought rapid changes to Pine Ridge. State authorities dismantled Brooks's organization piece by piece, each revelation more damning than the last. The special school was raided, children rescued and returned to their families. Brooks's political connections abandoned him as evidence mounted of decades of corruption and exploitation. Greg Peterson faced multiple charges from fraud to conspiracy. Travis turned state's evidence revealing details of operations stretching back years. Brooks himself, defiant to the end, was denied bail and remanded to state custody pending trial. And Vanessa Peterson, in an unexpected twist, confessed everything she knew. Her testimony proved vital in building the case against Brooks and Greg. In exchange for her cooperation, prosecutors recommended leniency. 1 week after the raid on R9, Michael sat with Sophie in Elizabeth Johnson's living room, the winter sun streaming through the windows. Rebecca Morgan had just left after sharing news that her expose on Brooks would run in tomorrow's state paper. Kevin, recovering well from his ordeal, was helping his mother in the kitchen. What happens now? Sophie asked Sergeant the Bear, secure in her arms. Michael had been dreading this question. The State Child Welfare Department had been in contact discussing Sophie's placement now that her stepmother was facing criminal charges. Well, he began carefully. They need to find you a home, someone to take care of you until you're grown up. Sophie regarded him steadily. Like you. The directness of her question caught him off guard. Sophie, I don't know if I would be good at being a father. You're good at keeping promises, she observed, and protecting people. That's what daddies do. From the kitchen doorway, Elizabeth spoke gently. She has a point, Michael. He looked from Elizabeth to Sophie, seeing the future stretching before him, a future suddenly filled with school projects and skinned knees, bedtime stories, and birthday cakes. It terrified him. And yet, I promised your father I would look after you, he said slowly. If that's what you want, I'll apply to become your guardian. Sophie's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. I want that. Spring came early to Pine Ridge that year. The snow retreated, revealing green shoots pushing through the softened earth. At the site of the burned church, construction had begun on a new building, its foundation broader and stronger than the original. Michael stood beside James Carter's grave, Sophie's small hand in his. They had come to place fresh flowers, real ones now, not winter blooms wrapped against the cold. The headstone had been cleaned, the inscription freshly gilded in the morning light. Do you think he knows? Sophie asked, looking up at Michael. That we're okay now. Michael considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I think he does. Sophie nodded, satisfied. She placed her bouquet carefully at the base of the stone, then stepped back, her face solemn yet peaceful. Can we go home now? Home. The word held new meaning for Michael now. Not just a place, but a promise fulfilled. A second chance. Yes, he said, taking her hand again. Let's go home. As they walked away through the greening cemetery, a spring breeze stirred the newly planted grass. To Michael, it felt almost like a benediction, or perhaps the approving nod of an old friend watching over them still. Sometimes the final protector comes from where we least expect, from promises made and kept, from courage found in the darkest hour, from the unshakable belief that goodness can triumph over evil, even in the coldest winter of the soul. And sometimes in protecting others, we find the healing we ourselves most needed.